Last month, a 78-year-old man published a 500-word crime novel about a pill-popping LAPD fixer caught between a Halloween murder and Richard Nixon. It's called Red Sheet, and reviewers are already calling it the sharpest novel he's written in 30 years. His name is James Ellroy, and he might be the most distinctive stylist working in American crime fiction. Almost nobody writes like him. So today, I want to figure out how he pulls it off and what we can borrow for our own pages. Welcome back to Fireside Writer. I'm TJ Stecker, and this is the channel where we take apart the authors who shape the way the rest of us tell stories. This one's part of my I Want to Write Like series, where I pull a master off the shelf and look at what's under the hood. By the end of this, you'll know where James Ellroy came from and how he rewired the way I write my own thrillers. Let's start with the man himself, because the story explains his style. To understand Ellroy, you have to start with a single afternoon in 1958. He was 10 years old when his mother, Geneva, was murdered in El Monte, California. The case was never solved. That wound became the catalyst for his writing career. His teens and 20s were a slow-motion train wreck of petty theft and heavy drinking. He broke into homes and slept in parks. He nearly died more than once. Then he got sober, picked up a pen, and turned that obsession with crime into a career. If you want the unfiltered version of that story, he wrote a memoir about it called My Dark Places, where he reopens his mother's cold case as an adult. It's one of the most honest things any crime writer has put on paper. But Ellroy didn't stop there. He built two giant projects out of that obsession. First came the LA Quartet, 4 novels including The Black Dahlia and LA Confidential, mapping the secret history of his home city. Then came the Underworld USA trilogy, where he dragged that same corruption up onto the national stage and tangled it with figures like the Kennedys. That history also explains the thing that makes Ellroy Ellroy. He isn't interested in tidy little mysteries. He's interested in rot. The rot underneath institutions and the official version of history. He assumes a demon dog persona in interviews. He uses that to cover up his very old and very real grief. Okay, quick, before we open the book, if you're finding this useful, take a second and hit subscribe. It's free and it helps the channel grow more than you think. Tap it and more of these breakdowns will show up in your feed. All right, let's get into the work. If you want to hear him talk about craft in his own words, you've got 2 great places to start. The first is My Dark Places, his memoir. The second is the documentary Feast of Death, where you can watch him hold court on murder and obsession for an hour. He also has dozens of interviews floating around on YouTube, and they're fascinating. Let's open the book that most people point to first, LA Confidential. It's 1950s Los Angeles. A massacre at an all-night diner called the Nite Owl pulls in 3 very different cops. There's a brutal enforcer and an ambitious climber who will step on anyone in his way, along with a slick Hollywood type who's hooked on his own celebrity. 6 people get shotgunned to death, and the official story comes together a little too neatly. The plot is a maze, and you'll lose the thread once or twice. That's fine. The case was never really the point. The point is the department that covers its own tracks. The power broker who decides which truths get buried. Standing at the center of that machine is a character named Dudley Smith, a high-ranking cop who's all charm but corruption underneath. He's the template for a certain kind of villain, the authority figure you're supposed to trust. By the time you reach the end, you understand the villain was never really just one man. It was the whole rotten system and the people who fed it. Then there's the prose. In his later books, Ellroy strips his sentences down to the bone. He strips out the connective words and leaves you with short, hammering fragments. There's a reason that works. When you remove the smooth transitions, the reader's brain has to sprint to keep up, and that scramble feels like paranoia. It reads fast and mean. You can feel the city's dread in the rhythm itself. So how does any of this show up in my own work? More than I expected when I sat down to figure this out. In my thriller Redacted, my protagonist, Jeff Coburn, starts by pulling one small thread, a dead uncle, a suicide that doesn't sit right. By the end, the threads run through a Pentagon cover-up and defense contractor fraud that traces all the way back to Vietnam. That's pure Ellroy. The crime in front of you is just the door. What's behind it is an institution protecting itself across 50 years. I didn't copy his sentences, but I absolutely learned from him that the most frightening antagonist is rarely ever one single person. It's a system who decides whose name gets erased. There's one specific trick I picked up from him too. Ellroy's writing makes paperwork menacing. A file or an official record becomes a loaded gun. I lean on that hard. In Redacted, the evidence that breaks everything open is a stack of documents tying a contract firm to defense fraud. In The Moth, The turn comes when Jolene reads an old investigative file and realizes the contents have been doctored. Dull paperwork made into a weapon. That's how Ellroy moves. So here's what I take away from him at the core. I let the institution itself be the real enemy, and I trust the rhythm to carry the tension when the facts get heavy. Past that, I try to resist handing readers a tidy, comfortable ending, because real corruption rarely offers one. But here's where I differ, and where I'm still figuring it out. I don't write as savage as he does, and I don't strip my prose as far down to the bone. I'm still learning just how much white space my own voice can stand. But that's the fun part. You study the master, and you take what fits and leave the rest. If you got something out of this, drop a comment. Let me know, which author should I cover next? And if you're new here, subscribe and stick around. We do this every single week. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking out James Ellroy. And next time, I'll see you by the fire.